Hello, everybody. Nelson Vergel here with Program for Wellness Restoration, powerusa.org, a nonprofit that focuses on education for HIV-positive patients and their clinicians. I am very honored today. Finally, she agreed to do one of these interviews. She is the hardest working activist that I've ever known in my life, HIV activist. I've met her maybe around 2000 when she was creating the HIV, the AIDS Activist Coalition here in Houston. And she's been working her ass off since the 80s.
I wish you'd say it's still there.
To make everybody with HIV's lives easier. She's done great things. Her name is Lynda Dee. She's a tough criminal lawyer in Baltimore. We need a good lawyer in HIV. And she runs a few nonprofits, and she's going to tell us a little bit about herself, and I'm going to ask her a few questions so that everybody out there gets to know what this wonderful woman has done for everybody living with HIV. Hi, Lynda.
Hi, Nelson. Thank you for the nice intro. I don't know if I'm the hardest working. I know I work hard, and I don't know. I think there are a lot of other people that do too. So anyway, and I wasn't the only one. There were a lot of co-founders for ATAC when we were in Houston when I first met you. I never forget you. I liked you from Jump Street. Anyway, so let me tell you how I got started doing this. I was a party girl. You know, I went to all the gay clubs. All my friends were gay. I guess really I knew we were having too much fun because AIDS hit. And there were lots of instances in my life. I mean, I did a lot of drugs in my life. And it was like my gay friends really saved me from hard drugs. You know, they gave me another avenue of really good people and worthwhile people. And they really did save me. So when they started to get sick, I just feel like, you know, I couldn't leave them to be like, oh my God. And when I get determined, it's like, okay, wait a minute. My girlfriends are not going to die on me and leave me by myself. It was as much for my own benefit as theirs. And when they started to die, the work really saved me from hanging myself. You know, if you hadn't lived through those years, you can't imagine what it was like. My husband, who I actually met at the cock ring in New York, funny, right? Anyway, he got diagnosed with HIV in 1986, and he died in 1987. So he was in the hospital like 9 times in 10 months. So I watched all of my friends. We lived in New York and Hoboken for quite a bit of time, and then we came back here. It was crazy. We came back to Baltimore, and that's a whole nother story. But anyway, I really watched them die from all these hideous opportunistic infections. It was unbelievable. It was really like the tortures of Job. So I just felt like, you know what, if you can put a man on the moon, that old adage, we can do anything if you put enough money to this. And I'm going to make sure that they do. And I really, you know, I'm a lawyer and I'm nobody's dummy, but I really had a good aptitude for medicine and medical things, and you know, being an old druggie for so long. I mean, I had a lot of things happen to me, so I was familiar with a lot of body processes and how things work and what made them go wrong and what to do for it. But I really learned a lot, and I was good at it, and I wasn't afraid of the doctors. I wasn't afraid to speak up to them, and it really, as I said, saved me. Once he died, I mean, in those days, 2 and 3 people died a week, sometimes in 3 days. You know, sometimes it was better that they died in 3 days instead of going blind, going crazy, you know, having horrible diseases where, I mean, you can't imagine what it was like. So that's how I got started. And once I did, we, you know, at AIDS Action, we started because like I said, all of our friends were dying, and we started collecting money and raising money for rent and food and all the necessities that people needed. You know, one day they were working and the next day they couldn't work.
Yeah, and you said AIDS Action, you mean AIDS Action Baltimore, right? Yes. That's your nonprofit?
Yes. I mean, all of a sudden people just couldn't work and they were stuck. So that's how we started. We had our first benefit in the Hippo, which is not there anymore. It just closed not too long ago. It's a pretty famous old bar. And we just kept it up. And, you know, Gary Lambert and I started AIDS Action with Pat Moran. And, you know, we're the oldest surviving AIDS organization in Baltimore. And Gary and I knew that without research and new drugs, everybody was going to die. So we really focused on that and focused on Hopkins. That's where my husband was. You know, we dealt with the city, we dealt with the state, but we knew research was the issue, you know.
Yes.
So we got involved with Hopkins. Since we came from New York, my husband and I, you know, we were all plugged into what was going on there, and we had friends all over the country, you know, up and down the East Coast.
Yeah, and that was back before the internet too, right?
Excuse me?
That was before the internet, so, you know, you have to do all the networking.
No internet, no smartphones. So there were newsletters, you know, people used to send out, really John James from San Francisco would send out these newsletters of all the new information, and we were all sort of connected, and we got together at big, you know, events. But it was very, very hard, very much different and more difficult because we didn't have the internet to you know, to remain connected. I mean, that really made a huge difference when it happened. And, you know, I mean, I still had many friends in New York. So after my husband died, I used to go to New York and go to ACT UP meetings, and I met all the TAG boys, the actual treatment and data committee that left ACT UP and became TAG. So I was like on their first board. So I've been around for a long time.
Yes,
and
you have.
I have to say that, you know, if you asked me, give me, you know, what if you had 3 wishes, what would they be? And one of them would be, I mean, obviously before AIDS, I'd like to know everything in the world. So, you know, all of this medical stuff is really very interesting to me and very enlightening, and it keeps me sharp. I'm a very curious person. So I love all this new information, and I used to have a good memory anyway, and so I'm good at it. And I'm really, as I said, I can be very fierce and very fearless, so I'm not afraid to speak up.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I've been in many, many meetings with you, and pharmaceuticals, the government, research groups. I don't want to say they fear you, but there is a little bit of that, oh my God, Lynda Dee, the lawyer coming in. And I always sat next to you because you always make me look better, because you are a lot more headstrong than I am, and it balances me out. So I've always,
you know,
I admire how fearless you are in front of a group of experts, you know, in research and science and government policy, and you never being afraid to speak up for all of us. You know, somebody asked me, hold on. Somebody asked me, I want to ask you this question. Why would a straight girl without HIV be so focused on you? I mean, you've been working in this thing since 84, right?
Years.
And now it's 2019, and you're still working.
I'm telling you, as I said, my friends, my boys up and down the East Coast, some in Chicago, a few on the West Coast, they saved my life. And my plan was to have them in my life for the rest of my life. And it really was not just about saving them. It was about saving my own self and keeping my life the way I wanted it to be with who I wanted to be with. Unfortunately, I lost about 2/3 of them. But once I got into it, I really loved it. I mean, you know, I'm an old lefty, you know, and it's so funny. You talk about being fearless. You know, I've always been that way. I'm Italian, and my family's from Italy, and when they got something to say, believe me, you're going to hear it. And you know, there's no 2 ways about it. When I was a teenager, like the Vietnam War, all of my uncles would sit around the table, and they were, you know, they were Italian and very conservative and often racist, and I would stand there and argue with each one of them, you know. So I come from a long line of, wait a minute, that's not the way it is, this is the way it is. So it just comes to me naturally.
Good training ground and good genes there.
Right.
Hey, listen, yes, I wanted to go right away and go into the details in the 90s, because most people living with HIV don't even know that HIV activists changed the way the FDA approves drugs. Tell us a little bit about that time and your involvement in the early 90s, mid 90s.
Well, let me give you an example. My husband had KS, and he had histoplasmosis. We lived in New York, we met in New York, but he was from Louisiana. And one of the diseases that's endemic down there is this fungus thing called histoplasmosis. He had that, and he had KS, where he had the lesions. And, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
About the work with the FDA.
I flashed his face. I'm really sorry.
It's okay. It's a work with the FDA to accelerate
right, yeah.
drug approval.
I'm sorry. I just lost a really good friend of mine last week, and so all of this is coming back to me from a lot of people. So I'm sorry I lost it for a minute.
It's all right.
With him, he had these two conditions: life-threatening, no two ways about it. But the only drug that was approved, and ACT wasn't approved, when he was first diagnosed, but it was approved before he died, and it wasn't indicated, which means that the doctors couldn't prescribe it for him because he never had pneumocystis. So, hello, why couldn't he try it? Just because he didn't have pneumocystis. The studies were for pneumocystis. They were all this big, and this is the way it worked, and everything was in these little boxes. Back in those days, you had to decide if you wanted to go blind or if you wanted to try a new antiviral therapy to try to help you, because in those days, they wouldn't let you take two antiviral drugs at the same time. And, the cytomegalovirus that blinded people because of their, immune dysfunction, and was a virus, and the drug was an antiviral, so you weren't allowed to do that. So, just crazy stuff. So we were like, what is the story here? Plus, then Mark Harrington really was a mentor to me, as well as Martin Delaney. Probably, I don't know, both of them really. But Marty was very big on the FDA and the regulatory issues because of these, so many people were dying so quickly. And Mark really knew about the NIH, and Marty did too, but that was his specialty. The nitty gritty of how all that worked. So I learned that from both of them, and was able to do both, and really became really good at doing both. So I remember the first time I went to an FDA meeting, it was with Marty around Compound Q, which didn't work and ended up really hurting people. But I met all the FDA people, and I knew that was the key to, they were so tight-assed in those days about what got approved, and there were all these old-fashioned ways of doing things. It took 12 years to get a drug approved, and nobody I knew had 12 years. So what we did, and really this was ACT UP, and TAG wasn't really. TAG was still ACT UP in those days.
Yeah, Gay Men's Health Crisis.
Excuse me.
Gay Men's Health Crisis, Project Inform.
They really were about providing services.
Yeah, and Project Inform.
It was TAG, it was ACT UP and Project Inform that were involved in the FDA regulatory stuff and the NIH and research stuff. So they worked so hard to do an expanded access program, a compassionate use program, whereby drugs that weren't yet approved could get out to people before they died. Now, there were a lot of mistakes around those programs, but, you've worked with me on all of those programs, and you know that both of us have, a real a soft place in our heart for people that have been infected a long time and people that have no other options.
Yeah, I'm alive because of that work. The work you've done, the work we've done to get expanded access and compassionate use. I would not be here talking to you if it wasn't for that.
People were able to get these drugs that kept them alive until, the cocktails came out and really made a difference in survival. Even if the single drugs, the monotherapy wasn't a good idea and it was the wrong thing to do, it still got people over the hurdles till we got to the point where something really did work. And now look at us, one pill once a day, a manageable disease. It's really wonderful. But changing those rules and staying after the FDA made all the difference in the world. And, infiltrating the NIH. And a lot of that was Marty too. Marty was really good friends with Tony Fauci. And Tony Fauci ordered the ACTG, the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, was the first group across the country that was multi-site sort of, a multi-site sort of group that did all of these big research protocols that also saved people's lives because it gave them access to these drugs in clinical trials. So Tony ordered the doctors to let us in. We were on every single committee. When we first started, Marty was on what they called the primary infection committee, which is really about HIV. It's not what we know now, what we now call primary infection. I was on the opportunistic infection committee, and no, wait a minute. I think and Mark Harrington and I were on the opportunistic infection committee, and then Mark went to the primary infection committee, and I went to the executive committee. So I kicked ass there for years, about getting the work done. I mean, they were new, and they had money to do things, but they were so unorganized. It was not their fault. It was like a massive operation. Just imagine hooking up all those sites with no internet in those days. Right?
Yeah.
They send me faxes of like 40 pages at a time, and
Yeah.
it was really very difficult. They were amazing doctors, and they still are. I mean, you talk about the hardest working people in the world. They're the hardest working people in the world.
Yeah.
So
let me ask you another question when it comes to the work, since we've been dealing with this for over 34, 35 years. I'm losing count. I mean, HIV
I know I've been doing it for like 33 this year.
Yeah, 33. So when, there's a lot of chatter on the internet, obviously from people saying that there's not enough being done to cure HIV, that the cure is being withheld, blah, 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 conspiracy theories, obviously. Tell us a little bit, and I know we're basically fast forwarding almost 25 years. What's going on with what committees you're involved in when it comes to HIV cure? What are activists still doing to advocate for the cure of HIV? Is it true that not enough is being done?
Okay. So it's never enough for me, but it's a lot that's being done. These conspiracy theories are not new. Back in the day, people used to think, oh, well, everybody got it from the hepatitis vaccine. You know what I mean? Or from, trials to do with hepatitis vaccines. And there were people that thought, oh, the government really gave it to us, trying to get rid of it. I mean, conspiracy theories are not new. And it really, let me just say this. Those doctors are hardworking, but a lot of them have really big egos. So if they thought they could win the prize, they would, nobody would stop them from being the one to actually find a cure for this. It just doesn't work that way. So, all right. And as far as things being done, that ACTG, for instance, there's still activists that work there. They are working on cure research as well as other, there are other groups that I'll go into in a bit about that. They not only are they in the United States, they're all over the world now, dealing with second-tier countries, people that are now not near as fortunate as we are. So they work night and day, and there's a couple of different networks. There's one for prevention, there's one for vaccines, there's one for clinical trials of antivirals and opportunistic infections and all kinds of stuff. So the government has a lot of that going on. The government also has and funds the Martin Delaney Collaborative, which is a group of 6 research sites that deal with HIV cure research. And there are other people around the world doing that work too. Of course, there's also AMFAR that's got a research site at Gladstone and at UCSF. I was the co-chair of that for a while with Jeff Taylor, and now I'm co-chair of the DARE CAB, which is also at UCSF. Steve Deeks and David Evans was co-chair with me, and you know about him in Project Inform. So he was co-chair with me for quite a few years, and now Danielle Campbell from LA. Wonderful, wonderful woman, young Black woman that's got fire in the belly about women with HIV. It's just wonderful. Anyway, so that group deals with the basic science of cure research. And I'm telling you, I'm 66 now, and it was hard enough. Most activists were liberal arts people, all right? We didn't study any of this stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's one thing when everybody you know is dying, you make it your business to learn things. It's another thing when you're 66 and you have to learn all this basic science. It's like Greek. Believe me when I tell you it's Greek. So, and the point about that is well, and let me just say this, if you sit on those calls long enough, even if you're doing something else, for me anyway, a lot of it sinks in anyway, the important stuff. What works, what doesn't, what's going to hurt you, and what's going to be too expensive. But anyway, there's a lot going on. You just wouldn't believe what a pesky fuck this virus is. It is unbelievable. It's very complicated. It's very much like cancer. You know, we haven't cured that in all these years. You know, it becomes part of your own body. So it's hard to kill it without killing you. And then you have the virus. You can test. It took us years. I mean, there in the beginning, you couldn't, you know, viral load was not validated. So anyway, now we have that. We can tell if drugs work. We don't have anything like that with cure to look at what is called the latent virus. You know, when you get a fever blister or shingles, it's in your body, it's dormant. Same thing with HIV. It sits there. Nobody knows why it's dormant. Nobody knows how to get rid of it. We learn more and more that it's everywhere in your body, from your head to your toes. So it's really kind of scary. So it's really a very, very tough problem. And we've made a lot of progress. And oftentimes, what happens is it's like, okay, process of elimination. Well, this doesn't work, and you know, you learn one thing, and then you put it in monkeys, and it doesn't work, and it's really it's going to be a good 10 years, 15 years, unless something really opportune happens. You know, fortuitously, many things have been cured by accident. So it's really, really tough.
And we already have one cure patient and a few others that, but obviously that was an extreme procedure that is not going to be.
Well, it's only for people with cancer. I mean, we can learn a lot from that, and God love them. We need to help everybody, but it's really not for most people unless you have HIV and cancer. Those different cure methods are not going to work for you. They could very well kill you. You know, better that you should take one pill a day, you know, once a day, than have the danger of a full body radiation and, you know, stem cell transplants. That's what's involved. And you have to be dying to get online for that stuff.
Yeah, but it's exciting at least that after,
it's really exciting.
After 11 years of the first cure patient, Timothy Brown, took us 11 years to get to potentially another one that was just presented at the conference at Croy, and potentially 3 more coming up. Is finally, because we were pretty depressed in the past 10 years thinking, why can't we replicate a case like Timothy Brown? So I'm going to move on to the next question. Very simple. I mean, you've been around. You've been to probably more meetings than anybody can count. I also want to make sure people understand you don't get paid to be in these meetings. I mean, this is almost
I get paid to do my AIDS Action stuff, but I don't get paid to do all the other stuff.
You have you're a director of a nonprofit in Baltimore, but you also have your criminal law practice. But a lot of this stuff, especially the cure stuff and all the committees you're in, that's basically your time out of your own pocket. People forget that a lot of this work is volunteer based, which is hard. But anyways, out of all the things, I mean, you've done so much, you've been exposed to so many crazy stuff. I have too, but you definitely have a longer career of an activist as I do. What made the biggest impression, or what has made like something crazy, something that you cannot ever forget in the 30s?
Well, you know, there's been a couple of things. And again, I told you, I'm an old lefty. I've been fighting the system and fighting City Hall and screaming at the government my whole life, as long as I can remember. So that's in my genes, and that's, you know, where I live. When we first started doing this, you know, the actions at the FDA were, I mean, you know, it was the gay guys that started these actions, these community things that were just amazing, colorful, and got such press, and really put their laid on the pavement with you know, gravestones and all of this high drama stuff that really got people's attention. So we did that at the FDA. I'll never forget the Storm the NIH action, Oh my God! It must have. They bus loaded all these people from New York. All these guys. It was like an army. I'm telling you. And you couldn't get away with that now. You know, like post 9/11. But in those days, you know, the NIH was a big campus. It's like a big college. It's got a lot of green areas and whatever. And building one is, I don't know if it's in the middle, but it looks like an almost like, I don't know, it's just a big building. But there's all this grass in front of it. And so, I mean, we came over those hills, the different hills, like an army, screaming and foghorns and colored smoke and banners and, you know, I mean, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. The other thing too, much more solid and much more heartbreaking is the names quilt. I mean, the first time that came to town,
AIDS quilt.
the AIDS quilt to Washington. It's funny, they came to Baltimore and they loved me and I loved them. And they asked me to be like a vagabond with them and go from place to place. I often wondered what would have happened if I'd have done that instead of this. But anyway.
Yeah, I still remember 1996, because I in Washington, how the quilt covered the entire,
Oh my God.
the entire what do you call that? The in front of the
Yeah.
the monument. I mean, that was tear. I mean, we many people crying. I was, and we had protests, and yeah, that was 96 was the year that things started changing for the better.
Right.
For most of us, and
what has impressed me so much about that is even as rotten as things are in the country now, and you know you got to be in it for the long game because it won't last forever. But what people can do, how people can make change here if they put their mind to it. We really, I mean, it wasn't 20 of us that made a difference in these different research and FDA areas. Now there's hundreds of people that save lives day by day, you know, in HRSA-related situations of providing care and doctors and heroes, you know what I mean?
Right.
But you know, we changed the system. We changed how drugs are approved, how people get access to them, you know, really big ticket items that helped other diseases as well as HIV. So it really wasn't that many of us. And that is still possible in this country. It's harder and it's different, but you can still do it.
Yeah, now we have the internet, so it should be easier. It's
Oh
just
my
that
God, it's so much easier. Although, of course, it's so much, you know, you spend so much time. Oftentimes it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, because you're sitting in front of a computer instead of.
It's supposed to be the information age, and nobody knows nothing. I never met so many dummies. You know what I mean? Listen to all this Trump business and all this. You know, in other words, all this misinformation and fake news.
Yeah.
So it really can be a double-edged sword. But it actually has connected us, and I don't know what we'd do without it at this point.
Let me ask you another question. On, you know, and we have challenges dealing with so many parties. You know, when it comes to pharmaceutical companies, you know, some of us, like you and me, we've been part of community advisory boards or community advisory groups, and we've had some issues. But what do you think are the biggest challenges, not only in the past but in the present, in dealing with pharmaceutical companies that are involved in it?
The biggest challenges in the past were like they were all like bankers, you know, all these old fart bankers. And they knew how to get drugs approved and they knew what they had to do and they were not willing to change. It was harder to get them to make changes than the government, believe it or not. So that's one thing. Now it's the pricing. I mean, it's outrageous. We live in a country where, and it's, you know, it's capitalism. I mean, they can get in trouble. You know, they can be sued by stockholders if they don't make as much money for their companies as possible. They can't. Nothing happens to them if their drugs are too expensive and people can't afford them and die because they can't afford them. It's crazy. It's upside down. So they get away with it because they can, and some companies are better than others. You know, I have to tell you, the hardest work that I've done, the most frustrating, sometimes it's been very rewarding on one end, but is this Fair Pricing Coalition stuff. I mean, you know about that. It's really hard when they live in a country where profit is king, where greed is God, you know? So, I mean, you know how that works with every business, with every company, but we're talking about people's lives here. So we have had luck with getting them. I mean, we really have gotten every HIV company and every HCV company to pay the entire copay due, the Obamacare, which is pretty high. And we've gotten them all to have patient assistance programs where people with no insurance can get drugs for free. When I first started, they had these programs. You couldn't find them on their websites. They were all different. They were lying about them. They weren't the least bit transparent. Now they all look like my high heel shoes, all colors, all even, all the snacks. They really we've made it so, boom, you can find it right away. We've insisted that they make these drugs accessible to people. I mean, that's not without its faults too, about that copay stuff, because it can sometimes make drugs cost more if they're generic, equivalents. But most of the time, it's not the case with HIV. But that's really been hard work. Really been hard work.
And what's the most exciting thing you see coming when it comes to, we're talking about research. Obviously, cure research is going to take a while. They're working really hard. But when it comes to shorter term, like less than 5 years from now,
I'll tell you, we have the tools right now to end this epidemic. It's public health, typical public health principles. If everybody remained on everybody that was positive remained on their antiviral drugs, and they remain negative, undetectable, I'm sorry, they couldn't infect anybody. So just think, exponentially how that would reduce the epidemic, all right? If everybody that was at risk was on PrEP or some other effective prevention technique, and PrEP is the most effective we know of at this point, in other words, again, 1 pill once a day, we could make short work of this. We really could get rid of it in 10 years, because the numbers would go down exponentially. We have to get the communities that are most at risk, because the epidemic is so prevalent in their demographic groups. So if we can do that, I mean, even if it's not perfect, because it's hard to take drugs every day, especially if they may just make you sick. It's hard when you have HIV, but because a lot of people aren't sick and they get sick of taking them, and then they get sick when they stop taking them. But imagine people that are non-HIV infected, some really, really young. I mean, nobody wants to get infected. Everybody wants to fuck like bunnies and not have to wear condoms. I mean, I remember. I may be old, but I remember that. Anyway, so, and they're not sick at all. They don't have any disease. Why should they, they have other things in their life. Oftentimes they're young. In the African-American community, they have so many challenges, homelessness, just all the problems of poverty, stigma, lack of care, lack of good care, not even knowing, just not being hooked up to the things that gay white men are, as far as internet access and the newsletters that I learned from. It's just not there for a lot of communities. So we really need to get to work in trying to raise that awareness. But that being said, we have the tools, if we really put enough money toward it, to put a big hurting on this epidemic in the United States. I mean, it is possible to really make a dent in the next 5 years. And when you decrease, percentage-wise, it exponentially reduces the risk of spreading it, of new incidences. So it's really arithmetic.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm very excited also, excuse me, about long-acting medications, not only for treatment, but also for prevention.
Absolutely.
Where you can give somebody a shot, once every month or so, and they don't have to deal with daily pills. That's coming up, and hopefully it'll be safe enough, not side effects. So
it provides its own challenges, though, because people have to go to the doctor more because they need to be checked more often.
Yeah.
They have, where they're going to, what we have coming out next is something that goes in your butt. So somebody has to inject that for you. But I mean, pretty soon, and it's going to be in at least 5-10 years. I mean, they're working on implants that you can take out if they make you sick, they're so easy, things that are
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
Pills that are going to be really long-term. So it's coming. I mean, the goal is to have maybe not as many antiviral drugs that we have for HIV, but but the goal is enough options for everybody that needs them. You know, all people have different challenges. Some don't like needles. Some rather have pills. Some would rather have an implant. That works best for them. You know, nobody will see it. You know, the thing about prevention is if people see you taking pills, they think you have HIV. So it's all that stigma. It's just really.
Yeah. And, you know, and also we'll talk about access in the developing world, but
well,
I mean,
there you
in
go.
the United States, we have a lot of options, and obviously in countries like my country, Venezuela, there are very few, and some countries are still prescribing this ACT or Serid, two very toxic drugs, to their people because they're the cheapest and they're generic. So,
and with Africa, they don't give people resistance tests.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I would say out of the 37 or million people in the world with HIV, you know, very few privileged ones like us, you know, in the States and Europe and Canada have access to several drugs that can treat different stages of resistance. And that's incredible in 2019. I mean, there are pharmaceutical companies also not letting go of patents so that poor countries can make this stuff. That's really criminal.
Yeah.
And one day, maybe
a lot of them are. The problem is every country has these different rules, so it's very difficult to try to deal with the FDAs of every one of these countries to get them approved and get them to where they need to go. I mean, just think about Africa. How do you get them from, you know, the train station or from the boat to the people that need them? It's really say, well, you can get Coca-Cola there, you can get antivirals there too, but it's really very different for people in those countries. It's just
so one more thing, probably the last thing two things I want to ask you before we close. What would you tell somebody, a younger person or somebody, you know, our age? I'm 60, you're younger than me, you look younger, but if they want to, I'm 60.
I'm 66.
Oh, infected for 34 years. So, but anyways, what would you tell somebody that wants to get involved in activism, especially the special breed of us that are dying breed, I would say, or they're like elephants or dinosaurs, they call us, in research, like research activists, the ones that get involved with discussions of studies and protocol design, ethics in cure research. Why would you tell somebody, let's say somebody in their 20s that wants to get involved, either through volunteer work or even through a career of activism? Right. What would you suggest?
I would say don't be afraid. You know, just like every discipline, the HIV has its own language, and a lot of it is science. Just don't be afraid. We're all self-taught. We all, Abraham Lincoln did, you know, I mean, like I said, I went to Catholic school. All the nuns ever taught us was where the rain came from. You know what I mean? You just can't be afraid. If this is what you might want to do, if you want to make a difference in this world, you really can. I mean, it's still so much work to do. Just
where would somebody go, though, to get involved? Or call or email?
What sort of work you want to do? I mean,
no, I'm focusing on research, on science.
Go online and find different websites. You know, I mean, it depends on I guess, whether you wanted to do cure or prevention research or whatever. Everything is so specialized, it gets a little bit confusing. But, I mean, there's all kind of, you can find anything online. You know, if you live in a big city, it's often more difficult in rural areas, but there are AIDS organizations in those big cities where you could go and talk to people and talk to, you know, most of them have different sorts of offices and do outreach. Talk to people and they can hook you up with different organizations. You know what? I remember the days. I was back in Baltimore. I didn't stop till I found it. I was relentless. And if you really are interested in it, just do the same thing. It's no different than wanting to be a movie star or a rock star. You have to have the drive to do it, and you just can't quit, and you just can't be afraid.
Yeah, especially don't be intimidated by the language.
Exactly.
Because we,
Or you know what? We're all afraid of things. You know, you just push on and then you do it step by step, one step at a time, and then all of a sudden you've been doing it for 32 years. And everybody quakes when they see you coming and they listen to what you say.
and last but not least, what would you tell a younger Lynda Dee, Lynda Dee of the 80s, now that you know what you know?
Run like hell. No, I'm happy with my life. I mean, I can look in the mirror. I love being an old lefty. I love that I've been true to myself. I could have made a lot more money, you know, but I got enough. How much money do you need? Just be true to yourself. Do what you want to do. Follow your heart and follow your dreams, and just don't be afraid. And if activism is what you want to do, there's so many avenues of activism, especially now. Jesus Christ. I mean, there are groups in Peoria dealing with politics and stuff like that now. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be AIDS. I would just, we need the younger generation in this country now more than we ever have before. It's been such complacency, and you can tell it just in AIDS activism. I mean, we're like victims of our own success here because, I mean, back in the day when people were dying like flies, there were a lot of people like us involved in this stuff. And there's not now because people don't feel the urgency. You know, let the urgency come back because we're at a place where if we continue that push and continue that urgency, we really can make this go away, or at least be a lot more controllable than it is now. Just do it. That's what I say.
Well, Lynda, thank you so much. I've enjoyed working with you for 20 some years. We are both very headstrong. I kind of miss those days. I'm obviously have moved on with
all sorts of background.
Yeah, I do miss going to those meetings. I'm like many people that were in activism. We had to move on with our lifestyle now that we're healthy and make a little money to pay for our bills. Back in the days, I was never worried about money because I thought I wasn't going to live that long anyway.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, but I want to thank you for all the work you've done most people
my life, and it has made my life much more interesting.
Of course, it's a passion that you have and the purpose, but I don't think most people out there know who you are and the work you've done. And that's why I wanted to do this interview because, there are unsung heroes out there, and you're definitely in the top of that list of those that don't get the fancy names or exposure or 1,000 pages on Google, but they're doing all the work behind the scenes, going to the meetings, not sitting in front of a computer all day, but actually talking to people. And that's what you've done. And you've saved thousands of lives just by the work you've done.
It makes me really happy that that's the case.
Of course it is. And you've had a full life of devotion and service. So thank you so much. And everybody, this video will be posted on YouTube and hopefully other websites where, and if anybody wants to get a hold of you, they can go through the AIDS Action Baltimore website.
Yeah, aidsactionbaltimore.org.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and you have a great day.
Because I'm old, but you can get in touch with us that way.
All right, Lynda. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. You take care, okay?
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, baby. You did really well.